That's why the NATO alliance was created, to secure peace and stability in Europe after World War II. The United States is a member, along with 29 other nations. It matters. American diplomacy matters. Putin's latest attack on Ukraine was premeditated and totally unprovoked. He rejected repeated efforts at diplomacy. He thought the West and NATO wouldn't respond, and many others, even Switzerland, are inflicting pain on Russia and supporting the people of Ukraine. Putin is now isolated from the world more than he has ever been. Together.
So as we all know, Russia is invading Ukraine right now. And in response to that, the DSA put out a statement condemning the invasion of Ukraine, but also saying that the United States should de-escalate and get out of NATO. Now, this has sparked a ton of backlash. And so I'm going to give you a little bit of a history background on why the DSA might say that the United States should pull out of NATO, specifically in a response to this. First and foremost, we need to understand a little bit of history. NATO formed as a sort of counterbalance to the Warsaw Pact. But the Warsaw Pact is gone now, so why does NATO still exist? Well, the truth of the matter is, NATO exists as an oppositional and aggressive force against Russia. And this is made very clear when you see NATO's response to Russia trying to join NATO, because Russia actually tried to join NATO several times. And so NATO has made itself clear that it is an oppositional force to Russia. And NATO has also played a very significant role in countless imperialist wars that the US has waged around the world. Things like invading Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, you name it, and there's a lot of NATO involvement. Now, if somebody bothered to have an analysis that include a colonial perspective as to why NATO exists, you could say that former colonial powers formed an alliance in order to maintain their system of domination over the rest of the world so that they could use the guise of international peace to justify invading countries that don't agree to the economic terms that the United States thinks that everybody should follow. And that really is the context and history of why NATO exists today. Now, if you understand that history and context, and you recognize NATO to fundamentally be a tool of maintaining Western hegemony, then you can understand why it might have a significant role in this situation. Because, and here's where it gets wild, experts in international politics have basically been saying that the idea of Ukraine joining NATO would inevitably lead to Russia invading NATO. Experts have actually been saying this since the 90s. They basically said that Russia is afraid that NATO exists as an oppositional force to destabilize Russia, which NATO has kind of proven itself to be exactly that several times, and that because of the expansion of NATO over the many years, Ukraine would basically be a red line. And this is where it gets really critical, because basically what was happening is experts agreed that if Ukraine became a NATO ally, that would mean Russia invades. And by dangling that membership in front of them, NATO was making a gamble. They were quite literally gambling with the lives of the Ukrainian people because they were trying to instigate Russia. And now, if we take the cynical perspective, or what I would like to consider the sort of realistic perspective of what drives American foreign policy, that being profits for defense contractors and oil companies, you can see how even this right here is exactly what the United States wanted. What you are seeing right now, at a time when our stock market was already kind of struggling because of the pandemic, is you see a boom in oil stocks and you see a boom in defense contractor stocks. And why is that? Well, it's because it turns out that a lot of American companies are gearing up to profit off of this war in Ukraine right now as we speak. Now, does this mean that Putin doesn't hold any responsibility for this? No, of course he does. Putin is the person who decided to actually invade Ukraine, so of course he has responsibility. But also at the same time, NATO holds responsibility because NATO was actively goading this on. And the United States has responsibility because the United States was always looking to profit off of tensions, conflict, and destabilization in Ukraine. And the people who are trying to say that the DSA is entirely wrong for opposing NATO membership are completely ignoring the fact that the last time that there was a military invasion or a bombing campaign in Europe was actually when NATO was bombing Belgrade. And if you don't remember, NATO actually bombed embassies and hospitals. And that's just, of course, in Europe, because The truth of the matter is, while everybody's hyper fixated on this and pretending that it's somehow different because it's in Europe, I personally fail to see any moral difference between invading Ukraine, invading Iraq, invading Afghanistan, invading Libya, because the truth of the matter is that these are innocent people whose lives are being lost because of a foreign country invading. And if we're talking from a pure numerical standpoint, NATO is undeniably responsible for far more death and suffering than Russia has been over the past 30 years. Which brings us to today. What is necessary to stop this invasion? Ultimately, today, Putin is the only one that can make the decision to pull troops out of Ukraine. However, there are things that Putin clearly wants, and there are things that we can do as the United States of America to de-escalate. One of those things being cooling down NATO and potentially even pulling out of NATO. The idea that having a network of military alliances somehow maintains peace, I think was perfectly disproven by World War I. And having a military alliance that is specifically oriented to counterbalance a country that no longer exists, that is to say the USSR, but still to this day is aggravating Russia, is complete nonsense. The only reason they're keeping NATO around is because a lot of former colonial powers like to have the military might to bully countries around the world. And while it is completely unjustified and unreasonable for Putin to be invading Ukraine, it is reasonable for Putin to not want NATO to expand. And it's also reasonable for Americans to demand that NATO stop imperializing the world and to even demand an end to NATO.
This is Ben Carollo with Rebel Headquarters. You can catch my show Galaxy Brain on the Young Turks Twitch channel every Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. If you want to stay up to date with my content, you can follow me at Benjamin Carollo on Twitter. And lastly, to those of you who might be wondering or have noticed, my pronouns are in fact she, her.